what it means to be good, to be virtuous, is something debated across time and space. And it's very hard to pin down. As in most situations, it really depends. Depends on the circumstance of what type of virtue is called for. But there are some great minds from long ago who've had things to say about this matter, and I'd like to talk about one of them. Hello, my friends. My name is Spencer. I'm a maker, and I love stories. Today, I'd like to tell you about the 四君子, or the 4 gentlemen, the 4 virtuous ones. In Chinese, referred to by the names of these 4 gentlemen, which might come as a surprise to you once you hear the translation, but 梅兰竹菊, the 4 different plants that are recognized to have virtuous qualities we should try and adapt into our lives. The mei is a truncation of meihua, which is the plum flower. The plum flower is quite unique, especially among these 4, in that it is a 5-petaled, red, vibrant flower that blooms straight from a tree at the very end of winter, when it's basically still winter. So if you picture all of the snow on the ground, and then the first thing to bloom, the first pop of color, where it grows, is our plum flower, the meihua. Now, why would this be seen as a virtuous thing? Well, this idea is all attributed to Confucius. However, it's uncertain if he is actually the one who thought of it. That the meihua tells us to show our best self under pressure, which is often very hard to do. If you think of a procrastinator who does get work done in the end, this could be where that person might shine. When there is external forces upon us that are hindrances to us, perhaps, that is when we can be, as the meihua, strong and perhaps our most beautiful self, once the situation calls for it, once we're at that precipice where we must act. So there is a certain type of strength with our meihua, which then leads us to our second virtuous one, lanhua, the orchid. So the orchid is quite the opposite in a lot of ways of the meihua, in that if you know anything about orchids, you'll know that it's very difficult to cultivate them. It takes a very special set of conditions and perhaps a very tender and nurturing cultivator to make an orchid bloom. And orchids, by nature, because they do bloom in nature, they tend to be in valleys where perhaps no one can even see them. They're surrounded by mountains on all sides. However, it's understood that among the 4, the orchid is the most beautiful. And because of its way of being, it must be very, very quiet and do things just at its right time. So it is seen among these 君子, these gentlemen, these virtuous ones, as the quiet one, the one who doesn't make a fuss, doesn't make a big spectacle of themselves, but simply is beautiful and blooms at the proper time, perhaps away from all. This is something that those who have problems with pride or hubris might find as an inspiration. The third is what I feel a lot of people would immediately gravitate to. At least I've found that the people I've told this story to, their first inclination is to say, that's what I want to be the most like, is the 竹子, the bamboo. So bamboo is actually very, very interesting. It spends a long time underground before it ever sprouts itself. And when it does sprout, its sections, so bamboo has these sections, right? Its sections are all there. So it's not the case that bamboo grows a section and then starts a new section, and once it gets big enough, it starts the next one. But actually, every section that it will ever have is already part of it, and those sections simply elongate. And the rate at which they elongate is so rapid that you can actually see it grow before your eyes. It is one of the most aggressive plants out there, and it is also very flexible. It's used for a lot of things, utilitarian-wise. In a lot of the world, they use it for scaffolding, for example, so it is very sturdy, but it also is very supple and sort of feels alive all the time. And yet, it is hollow. It is not something that is fully solid. But if you were to cut open a cross-section of bamboo, you'd see that it actually has a big hole in the center of it. And the way in which it grows not only is rapid in terms of its upward movement, but its lateral movement, it spreads very, very fast. And so bamboo takes its time to decide what it will be, who it will be, and what it will do. And once it makes that decision, it unceasingly strives to that goal, to its end, to its pinnacle, to the utmost. This is something I think a little bit fraught in our, at least in the West, and all over the world, I'd say right now, that there's this very, very lauded grind culture where everyone is supposed to be endlessly working hard and never letting up. But all seasons happen. So there will come a time where things will freeze and we must relax, or rather we should relax. And yet at the same time, the bamboo is hollow. It does work very hard, but it leaves space. There is part of it, there is room within it for more. And every vessel's capacity is what makes it a vessel. So discipline practice, discipline work, and doing things to their end is something cultivated through watching the 竹子, the bamboo. But the final plant, the 菊花, the chrysanthemum, is what I personally find to be the most laudable. And whatever you think about chrysanthemums, I certainly think they're beautiful, but that is not the connotation in this 四君子, these four virtuous ones metaphor. It is not seen as the most beautiful. It is not particularly strong or remarkable really in any way according to this idea. Again, what you think is your own thought. It's a different argument. But the chrysanthemum, unlike the meihua, the lanhua, and the zhuzi, is used for tea. And it's used for medicine. The chrysanthemum, in a way, sacrifices itself for the betterment of those around it. And this is the final junzi, the final virtuous one. Now, this is not necessarily to say literally sacrificing yourself for some other cause, though I'm sure that can be part of the meaning. But sacrificing is much more abstract than we might initially believe, thinking of this word. We can sacrifice our time, our effort. We could sacrifice our free thoughts, our mental space towards the helping out of something else or someone else. And the way in which the chrysanthemum does this also appears to be unremarkable, similar to the orchid, in that it's not flashy. It's not saying, look at what I did, isn't that wonderful? It's simply quietly helping. So all four of these junzi, these virtuous ones, these four plants, have traits that we can certainly be nourished by and adapt into our own lives. And I hope that we all do. Certainly there's one that you are more inclined to than another, as we all have different inclinations, different strengths and weaknesses. But I would suggest that you find the junzi, the plant, that speaks to you the least, and think, why is that the case? Could I be lacking in something that I, at least not necessarily in my character, but in the way I go about the world, that I could learn from these four beautiful plants? So today I've decided to carve a bowl, and I've sectioned it off to have a space for each of these four junzi, these gentlemen. And I've used underglaze to color them in, just with little accents to make the flowers and the plants pop a little more, because plants are a beautiful thing. I hope you've enjoyed this. I certainly have. And every time that I tell a story for one of these videos, or to anyone, I feel as though I'm reliving it again. So thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day.